Good evening again, and welcome everyone to fractalu.com. Tonight's course is entitled The Advanced Science of the Hygiene for Bliss, and we'll be talking about Kundalini triggers, Kundalini science, and how the Kundalini energy is triggered and what that has to do with Bliss process, hopefully in the most practical of terms, in terms of the hygiene, etc. What's on everyone's mind as we begin here this evening, here we are in South France, is Thomas Geckler and friends, with Susan and many friends there in Georgia, led a global meditation minutes ago, actually, using in part the Therify to trigger an energy field. We know it's a bit of an implosive plasma black hole, wormhole kind of thing, a shamanic tunnel, and it's very palpable. We feel it at a distance when these things are turned on, as would make sense that the conjugate plasma creates the sort of longitudinal EMF DNA radio kind of thing, and ideal for global meditation. And so we're proposing to develop that idea. It was truly felt globally, and that eventually we'd have these devices switched on various grid and energy node points and really extend the idea of a global meditation. Set with intent, etc. So that as the plasma creates an implosive sort of wormhole, that the point is that we can do certain things with technology, with the Therify.net, the conjugate plasma implosion, and it does make it in a kind of a centripetal vortex wormhole, and you can feel it, and the clairvoyants can see it. And the point is, however, that we don't look at this like a Borg or a purely technological phenomena. We're quite aware that the centripetal force of this tornado absolutely requires the human intention to steer the tornado. And that is as true of the individual healing we do with the plasma technology, where you feel this immense amount of charge in your aura, but then for the healing to be self-empowering, it's quite clear in the Therify, etc., that it's essential that the person involved kind of close their eyes, goes within, and directs and steers with their intention that tornado, that vortex, and they direct it to where healing is needed. And indeed, we have the literature that phase conjugate dielectric charge or plasma fields, as in the famous paper we speak of, Alice in barium titanate land, where the charge field of a conjugate material, conjugate dielectrics, appear to be self-aware. That is, they seem to know how to find each other at a distance, even like humans who love each other. And so the electrical engineering of this self-organizing or conjugate or fractal field fits beautifully with the spiritual traditions about pure intention creating the ability to create connectivity. And so we're integrating the idea of a technology of what we think actually was what the ancients called Dharana or Stargate. Dharana is a word, for example, used by Anton Parks to refer to the Stargates of the ancient. Remember that the alphabet used in the movie Stargate by Rick Hasson, the producer, who was my boss at Transicon Gaiam when we did the computer animations, the alphabet used for the movie Stargate was the Ophanim-Enochian. And we now know the hypercube symmetry of the Ophanim-Enochian alphabet is literally the index of the angle at which you would steer tornadoes toward convergence, literally twisters, so that the angle of approach of the incident symbols, or tornadoes or vortex, that they would converge at hypercube, which is a superset of the conjugate angles, meaning implosive. And that's what it means to cast a spell. So that we know that if you do the classical story is if you do a powerful ritual in a church, you blow the doors off. Well, didn't we blow your doors off, kids? But the physics actually is quite real in that it is necessary that the air pressure in the room of a powerful ritual would change as the charge field, the plasma field, became centripetal. And hence, did we blow your doors off, kids? So the meaning of to cast a spell in this sense is specifically to become centripetal and implosive, and that creates a net negentropic electric field, which is literally the dream spell, even in the sense of Jose Argoyas. Yes, Dante, speaking of that global meditation with Therify, which was just over an hour ago now, it's true that I believe Thomas mentioned that the Google Hangout technology they chose to share that over the web, the global meditation, had a limitation they didn't realize at the time, that there was a limit of like 10 people. So they're going to look for a new media, and there's lots of software options to have the visuals of the global meditation to be more shareable. So we're working on that, and Thomas will report in. I wonder if did Thomas come back online here, Susan, or he's probably still busy doing a Therify session over there. But it's fun to think about, what's the relationship between a plasma technology and a magical or an emotional or a spiritual technology, and it's very useful to understand that connection. Alan is saying that must be why the air begins to feel thick when we do deep ophanic work in our Enochian temple. Exactly, that is the point I'm making, that in fact, why you feel the air become thick, even like syrup, is because the charge density becomes so centripetal as to become stable, as to actually literally create more resistance to movement. Remember, the resistance to movement, called inertia, is the only definition physics has for mass. And when you create a charge spell or a dream spell or a magical spell, that you actually create an electric field, which, because it has a centripetal center for its tornado, that rotating charge feels inertia, feels like thick or syrupy air, which is a stillness, quite literally a stillness. And that is part of what we wish to discuss tonight about the hygiene for bliss, that the actual wind, unfortunately, can in effect blow your aura away a bit, dissipate the charge. So stillness is very important for charge ritual, because it allows the charge field to settle and become stable. It's well documented that stillness and quiet is essential for healing in hospitals, but we're becoming aware that a deep and profound stillness to allow the centripetal force to gather is related to the hygiene for bliss. Thomas, so you're back there now. Did you want to share a few words about the bliss process with the Therify and the meditation at all this evening, Thomas? You're the hero of the moment there, Thomas.
Unmuted. Okay. It was remarkable for me to sit here, because I've really kind of begun this relationship with the Therify goddess, as we're beginning to call her. And I was given very specific instructions about that, about heart space. And coincidentally enough, it is World Peace Day, as you know. And so it wasn't, for me, it was an ecstatic experience right up till the time we knew there were only 10 people in the room. And we'll work it out. Some of you may have seen, I posted afterwards that I'm sure a tech genius will show up, and it didn't even take 5 minutes. He's supposed to be here on Monday. So he said, oh, well, I'm coming there Monday anyway, and I'll take care of it. So that's what's happening, is the manifestation is within, it doesn't even take 10 minutes anymore. And it's so rapid and so abundant that even my cold, puny little heart has melted, and the most wonderful miracles have happened in my life. And there's some people in this room that know about it, and pretty much everybody does, I guess, if they've tuned in. It's just a wonderful experience. I'm so happy to be able to share it with people. It was just a real privilege to sit there. I feel real abundant, and people are coming out of the woodwork and coming to help, and
people are showing up with exact gifts and skills that are needed.
Exactly. Eden, for example, was it was a lovely experience to have Eden here for both of us. And Rob Sullivan was here. He was just a transformational experience. I get to sit here with everyone and watch, and and many of these people are house guests. So I do it right in front of them too. It's sort of a lovely thing to do, but it's a hard thing to transform and to transmute with everyone watching. It's easy to see out there. It's awful hard to see in yourself. But a wonderful thing is that everybody's taking me along with them on their ride, and I'm so proud and happy to be part of that. It really has opened my heart big time. So.
Wonderful, Thomas, wonderful, and becoming a shareable way.
It is, and it's so easy. It's so easy. It just takes that willingness, and we did the meditation about think of all the hearts beating at the same time, and that moment between the contraction and the expansion of the heart, which is really 0 point in your heart. And it's the same 0 point field that you sit in the Therify. It's lovely and peace. And you really reach a still point. That's, typically people at 3 minutes, right about 3 minutes, will take a breath and relax, and you can see their aura just smooth on out. They've reached that cerebral spinal 0 point. And and you just sit there and and I feel my heart beating with them. And I find myself breathing with them. It's just kind of an ecstatic experience. It's so intimate. It's way Kundalini. It's kind of neat. And I get to do it all day.
We're really grateful that you guys
a wonderful
have
experience.
become
This class is quite timely, Dan.
Oh yeah. I say it's the practice of bliss. Well, I got an idea. Everybody ought to get one of these things, and it's even better when you do it without your clothes on and stuff. But never mind. So.
Yeah, we're really grateful that you guys are leading the being ambassadors and sharing this. Thank you. And you have such a beautiful sacred space there. Anyway, we're grateful to those friends. My partner Valerie here is also suggesting that as we evolve these meditations, that we choose to focus on certain really sad situations, like all the people who are in prison and women who have been misused and the wars, and we really begin to set certain intentions.
Can I say something about that? In our experience here, what we've been able to do is different individuals and different groups are showing up to help clear and transcend that through themselves. And a lot of those layers have been falling away for all of us and all of mankind quite rapidly in the last few weeks. And I guess we need to update you on those things. We've cleared a lot of patterns. Therify has assisted teaching us how to do that. And it's quite powerful.
Wonderful, wonderful. Yes, it is about clearing pain inside so that it can be cleared outside. Right on.
Yeah. And actually transmuting world patterns and distortions that are in the entire crystalline grid of our planet through the Therify has been what's going on here.
Wonderful, wonderful. And please, continue to write about that, and we'll document and create feedback. And we want to be always emphasizing although the technology is beautiful and real, that it's the pure intent of people that gather. And I think you have a bit of cathedral sacred space inertia going there. It's all good. It's all good.
Heart's clear and pure. Yeah.
Incidentally, TJ is saying, does the Therify work better naked? Well, actually, we even say that in the protocol, that very light, loose-fitting, natural fabric clothing, and this is appropriate to our conversation this evening about hygiene for bliss, which allows your aura, your charge, to breathe. My shirt is hemp fiber, which is a very good dielectric, for example. But actually, it's true for most forms of bliss hygiene, including Kundalini. Actually, the less clothing, the better. I even find that even though I have natural fabric pants on, for example, that I distinctly feel more charged when I put shorts on and take my pants off. And it's very simple because literally your legs, the more parts of your skin that are exposed to the atmosphere, the more you can implode capacitance efficiently. And even when the World Without Blindness people were working to show that children could see without their eyes, that if you covered the skin, they could not see without their eyes. You see what this means? This means that your whole skin surface is an organ of perception. And the more it is exposed to ring dielectrically to the environment, you know, most of the gurus and the sadhus and the meditators, they spend much of their lives with as little clothing as possible. And there's a very specific electric reason for that, along with this, you know, wearing the right kind of shoes with a thin sole that conduct charge well so that you can do the grounding. The whole access to ground is so critical. And of course, then knowing how to be in a charged dense space. This is all the kinds of things we wanted to talk about tonight. And it's true that we can charge a space with a device like Therify.net. However, Therify works much better, of course, if it's an environment that's conducive to that. So the protocol we published for the Therify, which was to remove as much metal and electrosmog as possible from the Therify room, you know, particularly the steel and aluminum and as much wiring as possible, so that the capacitance can build implosively. The ancient stupa was a fabulous capacitor, but then modern stupas, they put steel rebar in the concrete, and it actually is obscene in a certain way because it depletes the ability to build the right capacitance. So that's what this evening's conversation is actually about, is how we build the right capacitance to actually achieve bliss. But the idea is this evening's conversation is supposed to translate that into the most practical of terms. So then we were going to, TJ is saying not having a metal flyer, buttons or whatever. Yeah, it's fairly minor, a tiny little bit of metal here and there in your clothing if necessary. You know, it's not to be worried about. But in general, to look for clothing without metal, you know, you have natural material even in a bra for the women, of course. Thomas had that joke on Facebook about the difficulty of women who had metal wires in their bra. But really that brings up an interesting conversation that we have for so long kind of tortured people by containing them in materials that prevent their aura from gaining power. So women, for example, have been abused for so long by clothing and things that restrict their aura from being powerful. And yes, yet in ancient times, we're going to study next week about the origin of fear of women on this planet being related to the origin of religion. And you know, the fear of psychokinetic women is effectively fear of having a big aura. So in effect, you know, restrictive clothing and synthetic clothing and clothing with metal in it and practices like genital mutilation, all of these things profoundly indicate a culture that doesn't understand what people are for, which is namely to get a very large aura. And only that creates the immune system and the immortality that's necessary. Thomas is saying, at first we allowed gold rings and such, but of late we're asking for no metal if it can be removed. That's right, it really, you know, it can charge the metal. By the way, Thomas, we have a new partner here in South France to help us going to start with soybeans, but we believe, as in the book Seeds of Knowledge, that we can charge seeds and rock powders, and we're going to begin the seed germination trials with igniting seeds with Therify. You know, it's very natural that lightning would cause a seed to grow faster, and now we know why, because it creates the centripetal field, which starts the seed. So the book Seeds of Knowledge said that, you know, ancient stone circles, one of their primary functions was to charge seeds, and they measured 25 to 30% growth improvement, Burke and Levengood. And so we believe now we have the ultimate seed charging device, Therify.net, and we're in the process of proving that. And so anyone else that can work with the testing seed germination effect with Therify, that's appreciated. And also, you know, like Plucker.de, they charge rock powders and they heal lakes and ignite farming with piezoelectric rock powder, namely calcite or quartz powder. As in the biodynamic preparations, it's the piezo that's important. As in the piezo That's important for the vortex nozzle, theimploder.com. So charging rock powder, you zap some of this rock powder, and we did this with Purify Ecosify, and then you put a little bit of that highly charged rock powder in polluted water and radically increase the sedimentation rate and also accelerate growth in plants. So charging rock powders and charging shaman and charging seeds, when you have a really good bioactive field, I will raise a shem unto the Lord, then we document that, what that does. And oh yes, and Thomas has the seeds for our partner. Our partner for theimploder.com is Jason Matozo of fractalwater.com, and he is coordinating another seed germination trial and got the seeds to Thomas. And Thomas is going to send half of those seeds back for the growth comparison tests up in New England. Thank you, Thomas. So all of this is the background to document what electrically a perfect bioactive field is. We have our website about that, bioactivefield.com, typing that in here. That the ideal bioactive field is massively centripetal, massively broad spectral conjugate, which is to say simply a fractalfield.com. And so, our intent here is to prove the principle, and not just for our own commercialization here, but really to make shareable a pure principle so we can understand why and how farmers can build their own stone circles, make the magnetic map of their farm and rearrange the dolmen to make the magnetic field look more like a rose and dramatically affect agriculture. This is an ancient Druidic and actually pre-Druidic technology, Gothic. I know. I'm thinking of the Visigothic. When we teach the advanced geobiology courses here in South France with Jan Lipnik, who is very famous here for his books on advanced geobiology in France, our neighbor, and Stefan Cardino, who we believe leads one of the most advanced geobiology schools in the world, outside of Geneva in Lausanne. His website is Génie2Lieu, typing it in, if I spell it right, Génie2Lieu.ch. Yes, there's a website for Stefan Cardino, what we believe is such an advanced school of geobiology. And so when we went out to do the magnetic mapping, for example, of the ancient Visigothic sites in the village over here, there's this huge stone temple. It's pre-Druidic. It's literally Visigothic. It's all golden ratios stone, and the windows are all aligned to the Hartmann Pei Curry lines. And over there, Jan is explaining to us. He's showing us, if you go to the top of that hill, there's a little spot where you can feel like it's very powerful magnetic vortex. You can feel it. And he showed us. He said, now the ancient Visigoths would go here and they would make a motion like this with his hand over this spot. And he said, this motion turns off the valve. And this motion turns, which is unpacking centrifugal, would turn on the valve. And we said, a valve, like a switch. He said, it's exactly like a switch. That actually, there's a huge network here around the Pyrenees. Every village around the mountain, where near Canigou, has this tradition where you switch the gates of the water flow from the mountain water and switch, every day at a certain hour, the water flowing from the mountain goes to a certain section of the village. And this is a very elaborate technology, which is the, ancient fertility of the mountain with the water. But the point they were making there was that the magnetic lines for the flow of fertility were switched in exactly the same way. The ancient Visigothic and Druid priests actually had valves for the magnetic lines of the earth installed all around the landscape, and the advanced Druids and Visigoth priests knew exactly where to go to switch the magnetic line, to switch the fertility of flow to certain areas. And this is actually measurable in nanoteslas, which is how the Kozyrev mirror people did it for installing the telepathic microwave cylinders of the Kozyrev mirror. They were all with this magnetic grid, which is being energized and switched in a giant fractal conjugate field. And so this is all part of the context of the hygiene for bliss. So let's even articulate the categories now of our practical hygiene for bliss. Ian says a good place to test the Therify with an extension. Yeah, we don't quite have the battery powered Therify working yet. I know something about the 500,000 volts power supply required. It's going to be a while before we get that going on batteries. We might need Elon Musk for that. But the nice thing about Therify is once you fire up the plasma field and it's resonating, you can turn it off, and the environment is conditioned exactly the way the Joe cell conditions the environment, and Cache claims the conditioning of the environment. We know what that means now. It means that the conjugate field begins to propagate more and more implosion, and gradually the whole room is saturated, and eventually you don't really need to turn the gadget on. And this is the nature of cathedral. Ex-catheter, the place very cathartic of the catheter of access to blood. Cathedral from the chair, the place of leverage. Of the semantics of the word cathedral are very rich. So we were about to try to articulate a sequence of categories in which to examine the hygiene for bliss. Now, we taught pieces of this for years. In the beginning of this course this evening, we're going to do the review of the basics, which is right now, and then later we're going to get into a little bit more esoteric aspects in terms of the triggers for Kundalini and Kundalini science, and something about my experience, perhaps. So, the way we used to teach these categories in the hygiene for bliss process, we talked about 4 major categories, one of which was the diet, the second was the environment, and third was the movement, and fourth was the psychology. So in terms of hygiene for bliss, just to have some arbitrary categories, recognize that what each of these categories for learning how to have bliss process practically in your daily life, that each of these categories can be summarized as the technique for attracting charge in every case. That is really what this is. It's about imploding capacitive charge. This is what builds your aura. This is what makes you centripetal and therefore psychokinetic. And it's also what provides you with the aura coherence, which then is called your Ba, or your boat into the underworld, the electric coherence of the capacitive weak charge field of your aura, as measurable with the GDV. That's the Ka, and as in the Ka-Ba. And the Ba is that part of your aura's charge envelope which can withstand the kind of compression, which is fractal or phase conjugate. Remember, pine cones kissing noses. That in electrical engineering, when phase conjugate fields converge, visualize the 10 spirals down the pine cone path here. I guess we have some of that. I have some of those pictures here. Let's see if I can. The spirals down the cone, it's literally a spiral down a pine cone. And in the spiral down a pine cone, what's happening is that there's what's called a translation of vorticity. And the translation of vorticity translates linear inertia, which is to say the transverse wave, into the longitudinal inertia. Here, let's see. I'm just going to try zooming into our little pine cone. I'm getting better at using my toys here. Bear with me. Yeah. Oh, here we go. The pine cone. There we are. Okay. So, if you can visualize this way down this pine cone here, this is actually 10 spirals of the golden mean on the perfect 60-degree conic angle, which is, could you hand me the Star Mother Valley? That when you nest dodeca inside each other infinitely, which is called Star Mother Kit, or the geometry of hydrogen, that dodeca constellation, which is the only possible three-dimensional wave fractal, is actually characterized by 12 pine cones at 60, 12 vortex at 60-degree conic angles, as in, for example, the perfect implosive vortex we call Schauberger's dream for the imploder.com, but also the 60-degree capacitive cone which Trevor Constable found most effective for rainmaking in the Reich weather engineering on the high seas. So we know what the perfect implosive cone is, and we know why it's a 60-degree cone or related to that, because it's the angle that permits waves to implode in 3 dimensions, which is literally the perfect compressibility defines all fractality, and perfect compressibility in 3D for wave mechanics takes only one form, and that is the infinite stellar dodecacosa, which is then the geometry of monoatomic materials and noble gases and all of the conjugators, like the noble gases we use in the plasma tubes therify.net. So what's happening when the charge travels down that perfect cone vortex is that the normal electromagnetic energy, most of the electromagnetics we deal with for communications, for example, the primary aspect of the charge inertia of the electromagnetic field that we utilize is called transverse wave mechanics, which is basically the wave that goes up and down like this. I usually use a slinky. Now, we've talked about this in every course, so this is only review. But the transverse wave is the one that goes up and down like this. But in order to reach incompressibly to the center of the vortex, the center of the nucleus, where actually transmutation and isotope transition and alchemy and literally healing is possible, requires a different kind of wave. So the transverse wave needs to be changed into a compression wave. The compression wave is like this, where the compressional wave travels like this, whereas the transverse wave travels like this. This compressional wave is called longitudinal electromagnetic field, and incorrectly sometimes called scalar or torsional. But scalar has so many meanings in physics, it's far more precise to call it longitudinal EMF. Point to be made is that the major part of the inertia of sound, for example, travels longitudinally like this. But electromagnetics, most often, is transverse. So if you want to make longitudinal electromagnetics, you got to work at it. And that's where phase conjugation, the path of charge down this pine cone, comes from. So if you visualize the inertia, which is initially rotational, as the charge enters the pine cone, but as it goes down the pine cone, that same inertia is translated non-destructively from this way to this way. And do you see that difference? This kind of motion in the electromagnetic transverse wave is suddenly translated to this kind of motion in the electric, which is the longitudinal EMF. And that relationship is very obviously an L, isn't it? Isn't that an L? That's a phase shift. That's literally Elohim, you see. You know, the L's were those, they were the lords or masters. Well, now we know what that, electrical engineers now know exactly what that is. That is the skill to be able to withstand compression in your aura non-destructively and have all that charge, information, memory. Remember, charge is information. That's why it's kind of funny that in Europe, a lot of the woo-woos say, oh, that wasn't an electric field, that was information. No. Charge that contains inertia is information by definition. In fact, there is no other form of information than charge that has entered symmetry. That's what information is. So when charge symmetry has translated its inertia, its vorticity, from the rotational and transverse component into the longitudinal and scalar torsional component, which is the healing psychokinetic component, that is called making the L, or phase shift. And the point is that most people's aura is not ready for that. There's a funny scene in Billy Meyer's Contact with the Pleiadians, right over here at Lake Maggiore, right near where Phyllis Schlemmer's Alex Collier learned the Andromedan stuff, right over here where the Pleiadians. Anyway, so Billy Meyer says, having this conversation, he basically, it's a scene right out of Star Trek. Billy Meyer says, well, beam me up, Scotty. I mean, beam me up, the Pleiadians. And every day they beam him up, and that was cool. But one day, Billy Meyer said he was kind of upset that day, and his aura was not very coherent, and they couldn't beam him up the normal way, and they did something which was much more uncomfortable. This is a true story, I think. And so the point is that if your aura is not coherent, then don't say, beam me up, Scotty, because it's going to be painful. What this means is that the process of beaming up, which we now know is phase conjugate, a plasma portal, that at the phase conjugate communion or fusion point of charge, the information can all be represented from the transverse back into the longitudinal. And remember, the longitudinal electromagnetic, scalar torsional, is the part that is superluminal, faster than light. All of the conversations about spiritual and divine and mindfulness and telepathy and how gravity waves go fast, all of this is the information that is transferred faster than the speed of light by the longitudinal component. Because phase conjugate longitudinal electromagnetics are provably, demonstrably superluminal, which is, say, faster than light. What does that mean? That means if you want to join the discipline of this global sort of DNA radio, collective unconscious, communion of saints, electrical engineers have other names for this. We call it Allison barium titanate land for phase conjugate dielectrics. But it's all the same symmetry lesson, pure physics principle, and that is L plus O plus V is geometry, love. L-O phi. Yeah, we can have a lot of fun with the words, and I think you're right. But the phase discipline that allows your aura to enter that discipline for perfected distribution. Remember, perfect wave distribution is what this is all about. How do you get into a geometry to enable perfected wave distribution? Thomas says we're playing with this, and it is bliss. Yes. So we wanted to talk about how we apply the understanding of this discipline to getting your charge so perfectly distributed. We want to apply this to an understanding of the hygiene for bliss, the hygiene for successful birth, for successful rebirthing, and successful death. That's where we want to go with this conversation. So what we're understanding now is that under certain conditions, the human aura, which is where all your memory ultimately resides, it's a weak, cold plasma capacitive field which you grow with your molecules in your biology. But your aura is intended to survive death. Your biologic molecules are not. And so your work is to grow it so you can take something with you. It's sort of like a bank account, but better. And so there are certain conditions which allow the human plasma body aura to be embedded, compressed, and charge distributed. And those conditions are what we want to explore this evening, actually, in part. And those conditions are specifically the conditions which allow your aura to traverse all its charge, all its transverse electromagnetics, down this pine cone non-destructively and get into that alternate form of propagation of the electromagnetic of you, which is called longitudinal, scalar torsional, faster than light, radio, which is DNA radio. It's the climax form of mitogenic radiation, which is to say DNA radio. It is the physics of how gravity waves travel faster than light, as Hodowanic and Ramsey measured, as the recent LIGO experiment did not measure. We made our comments about the limitation of the recent LIGO discovery, the limitations of the LIGO discovery of gravity waves. That conversation has recently been added to fractalfield.com/conjugate gravity. Namely, we said they failed to do the experiment to show that if the centers of mass are rearranged to conjugate dodeca spacing, that the amount of gravity increases. This is required by a conjugate theory of gravity. So that experiment hasn't been done. And so we say that then when they do that experiment, realize that conjugate dodeca spacing of masses makes more gravity than not. That will eliminate the need for hypothesizing dark matter and it will begin to explain to us how gravity waves travel faster than the speed of light, which also they did not measure because they didn't use the right transducer. You know, Weber and others spent millions on gravity wave sensors, as did the LIGO, which was optical, when in fact Hodowanik and Ramsey definitely measured very successful gravity waves with 25-cent capacitors called a rust track recorder. If you Google Hodowanik and Hodowanik gravity wave, just Google that, you get all the data. We put that at goldenmean.info/gravity code. So why am I mentioning that here in a conversation about hygiene? Well, this is background and evidence to say that if you want to get your biologic memory into a wave system which is distributable, superluminal, fast and light, godlike, the divine, very cool, blow your doors off kind of electromagnetic field, that it's best to understand this discipline, this hygiene that allows your electric charge to be imploded down the pine cone path to enable longitudinal wave propagation. Now, if we understood that, we could design hospitals for dying, which were much more electrically effective. Their electric field, their magnetic map of that hospital, the perfect hospice, would look like a rose. And that's all in our architecture curriculum. But also, we could understand the psychological process of death better. And for that, we mention, as evidence, the Heinrich-Kluve form constants, which we've mentioned in a bunch of these courses. Kluve form constants, and the pictures are at goldenmean.info/immortality. Immortality, yes, I think I spelled that right. And basically, you know, if you interview enough people who just died, well, yes, they interviewed enough people who just died, and you get a synthesis of what they saw. And what they said they saw was very clear. First they saw a lattice. The lattice structure is basically a cubic lattice structure. They lattice, and then after that they saw a cobweb, which is basically a lattice that went from a cubic to instead having a center point, which we now know is pent-related, implosive. So lattice, cobweb, and the next thing they saw after the cobweb was a tunnel. Cobweb merged into a tunnel. And then they saw a spiral. And then it would start over, lattice, cobweb, tunnel, spiral, and it would happen again and again. So when you die, this is the map. You know, you're going to Paris, get a map. If you're dying, get a map. There is one. Now, the reason that when you die, you see this very specific sequence of geometries, lattice, cobweb, tunnel, spiral, and this is proven, well documented. This is not subjective. They interviewed enough. And by the way, the LSD experiencers had as much to say as the near-death experiencers. So something to be said for that. Anyway, the reason you see those four geometrics is because, as we showed in the pictures of the article, that is the braid sequence geometry of DNA adding sequential superposed axes of spin, called going to the next dimension. And what is that? But that is only and exactly precisely successful compression, because it's the same as in here. When you put I don't know if you can see in the middle here, but it's a little hard to see there. But if you look carefully right in the middle there, you see the green. There's two green tetrahedron. Are they in there somewhere? Oh yeah, you can almost see them. The two green tetrahedron with red vertex, which are octa. So there's a tetracube in the center, and the angle of this tetracube, let's see, my finger's on the cube there. I don't know if you're going to see my finger on the cube. My finger's on the edge of a cube. And the angle that cube in that dodeca is at is precisely 32 degrees from the floor. So when I set this dodecahedron flat on the floor, plunk, like this, the angle of that cube in the dodeca is 32 degrees with respect to the dodecahedron. So dodecahedron is on the floor, and the cube is tilted up 32 degrees, the chin angle of the Sphinx for that reason. And then you rotate that cube at that new axis of symmetry, blink 5 times, and you have a dodecahedron. You went to the next dimension. Quite literally, in the only definition of what the next dimension is, which is the ability to superpose an axis of spin symmetry, which would then show up in the nodes as another harmonic in the frequency analysis in the power spectrum. So going to the next dimension here has a very specific meaning. It means the ability to superpose the next axis of spin symmetry. It's no coincidence that the guy who figured out first angel talk on the planet, John Dee, and some people think that I had certain shadows of the memory of the incarnation of John Dee, reincarnational fraction of memory, whatever. There was a connection to me there somewhere. But anyway, Vincent says that, yeah, Alan likes that part of the story. That little Ophanum story. So the point was that John Dee, his claim to fame before he figured out how to talk to angels was he was the lead mathematician to understand what a hypercube is. Pretty cool, right? So then later, Vincent Bridges, and this is all discussed in the pictures are at the website goldenmean.info/Ophanum. I put the web link in there. So Vincent is analyzing the symmetry of the Ophanum-Enochian letters. Remember the movie Stargate. And sure enough, he says, oh, well, the way these letter forms of the Ophanum-Enochian are nested in this table, related to the tablet of Nel-Lage, is literally a hypercube, which is a stellated tetracube, which is you rotate the tetracube out, then extend the cube in all directions. You have it, which is how a stellated tetra makes a cube octet. But then you jitterbug, and we do this for every course just only because it's fun. But the stellated tetra is the cube octet, and if you jitterbug the cube octet, it becomes icosa. And that's the point, that the collapse geometry, and we have mentioned this many times, and Nassim got this part right, that the trajectory of those nodes in the tetracube becoming icosahedral here. There's icosa, and there's tetracubic, cube octet. So that jitterbug, which I learned personally from Bucky, is the physics of the onset of superconductivity. But the reason it's the physics of the onset of superconductivity molecularly is, which is related to Buckminster-Fullerene and all the cool stuff that monoatomics and those are. The whole conversation about this is at fractalfield.com/cold plasma, typing the link. So the reason that the icosa, this is here. The reason this icosa is superconductive and this cuba octet is not is because the icosa dodeca, the infinite array of vertex nodes, this is the geometry of monoatomics, geometry of monatomic gold, the geometry of noble gases that we use for therapy, that when you infinite nest dodeca icosa, here's dodeca icosa, this infinite nest, 3 dimensions, that the distance to center of each one of those nodes infinitely is a simple whole number exponent of golden mean ratio, which is the equation I wrote for the radii of hydrogen, all starting with the Planck sphere, which is the same place that Nassim starts. And so we calculated the frequencies of the theraphi.net based on exactly that equation. So that is the geometry of infinite non-destructive collapse, which is true of dodeca icosa and is not true of tetracubic structures. So when you create a path for non-destructive collapse through center, it's a very important metaphor. I repeat, when you create a path for non-destructive collapse through center, I recommend that as a bumper sticker. That's probably, I recommend that as what you're meditating on at the moment of death. When you create a path for non-destructive compression through center implosive collapse, that is successful death defined. That is superconductivity defined. That is the perfect pinecone defined. That is the fractal field. You see what that is? So the adding and multiplying by golden ratio creates this infinite constructive implosive heterodyne, which is the mathematics, the physics we talked about. So that's the theory. Wayne is talking about open tuning. Music helps cross boundaries, yes. And we believe that that then creates the equation for the perfect implosion sound and therefore the perfect binaural beat, psychokinetic, all at that article, fractalfield.com/implosion sound, with the software ready to download there called Secret Sound. Acknowledgement to Mark Crooks for his help in programming that. And that's a part, certainly clearly the low frequency component of what we use for Therify. And we mix that accurately with the 500,000 volts firing the plasma, also at precise conjugate phase lock and phase angle. So all of that together creates a pretty compelling story of the physics. Cool. But tonight, we are supposed to be talking about the hygiene. So how do we apply that to the hygiene for Bliss and those 4 categories we talked about, and later the Kundalini? Essentially, we're saying that to access Bliss, your charge needs to be implosive. And when the implosion of charge begins towards center with all that physics we just discussed, and here's the picture in front of us, there are several very important practical hygiene considerations. One of which is that probably it is not a good idea to try Bliss practice in an environment which is not capacitively conducive to that kind of work. Namely, do not try your Bliss process in metal buildings full of electrosmog and dead air, because the first thing that happens during Bliss, and this is exactly true of setting up your Therify plasma system as well, the same physics applies. That's why Thomas did such a great job by putting this in a Cherokee Sacred Cathedral-like space. It was very important. I think this is a big part of the magic of what Thomas is doing there. The reason is because if you try your Bliss process in a geopathic environment, the very physics of Bliss, which is the same as the physics of zero-point energy and the Joe cell, and the fact that Therify itself is a zero-point energy device, as we're proving the phase conjugate Tesla coils, and Therify is it's an imploder. And even when it's sitting passively, it can resonate, and if you turn it on at the right time, it can actually blow a fuse with a charge that it sucked out of the air. So the reason you don't try your Bliss process in a geopathic environment is because the very nature of Bliss is to implode your environment. So the environment provides the inertia of charge for you to implode during your Bliss process. So, for example, if you're in a hospital with very bad vibes and you need to help heal someone, fine, you really focus and you radiate your charge, but you recognize that there are serious limitations to your ability to radiate your Bliss in an electrosmog-filled environment full of metal and bad stuff, because the capacitance cannot propagate efficiently. So regard Bliss science with electrical engineering skill, and you have something. The other aspect of Bliss science is that Bliss has critical mass, and it is contagious. What does that mean? It means that most people who have not yet had Bliss experiences probably cannot get the critical mass in their aura to make their own Bliss themselves initially, which is one of the electrical reasons of the need for group work. And this is particularly true in the case of the sacred gymnastic of Gurdjieff, for example, or yoga, or Tai Chi, or eurythmy, or Carlos Castaneda's tensegrity. It brings us to the question of the movement, the kinesthetic of Bliss. That initially it's so important to find a group to work with in creating the critical electrical inertia for Bliss, because that helps you develop the inner muscles to cohere the field, and later you can then do this by yourself. But initially, for young people, for example, the ability to do this in groups is important. And it's true, the group you choose, you should choose like the people you want to make love with, because your aura is going to commune. That's why your soul group should be chosen very slowly and carefully, and the same with your Bliss group. But the other thing you'll find about Bliss and Kundalini is people who are nearby who are not prepared or not ready or not involved, that if you're having intense bliss experience and there's people nearby that aren't involved or aren't ready or are angry or whatever, that they're likely to get a headache, for example. The reason is because as the charge tries to implode, it will accelerate their metabolism toward implosion. If they're not ready, there's a certain dissonance there. This is what's meant by bliss as critical mass. I mean, I have to say, even in practical terms, I will not forget many times that when I was having intense Kundalini, and then I would go into the office, the ladies in the office would report headaches quite frequently. It was more than coincidence, and I know why. And also that the aura of bliss will cause things like rainbows and rain, because you become centripetal enough to precipitate. Precipitate in magic and precipitate in physics have the same meaning, that they present a seed of symmetry, which is implosive and therefore fractal. Think philosopher's stone. And that is a precipitating agent. It has the same electrical function as a seeding clouds. Whether you fly around and put the halides, the cloud seeds into clouds, or whether a child is dancing barefoot in the mud, quite blissful, and then looks up and asks permission for a fluffy white cloud and focuses in the center of that cloud and puts a hole in the cloud, and any child can do it. The physics is the same of precipitation. The reason that the child put the hole in the cloud was because their focused human attention provided the seed, the electrical seed of centripetal force, physics of magic, the physics of precipitation. And so when there's a centripetal electric field that bliss causes, for example, the reason there's an effect on the rain and the clouds is because the water vapor molecular droplets use that centripetal electric field to learn how to touch. How to touch. This is a very important metaphor, more than metaphor, for the physics of bliss. That permission to touch for waves, we now know exactly what allows waves to have permission to touch. If waves arrive in a cube and they try to do a lot of touching and compressing, they create destructive electrical interference, because the octave ratio is mathematically perfect destructive recursive interference. That's what the octave is. We proved all that in the Wave Mathematics, fractalfield.com/mathematics. I'm typing the spelling correct, mathematics of fusion, 2 F's. Let's see, Terry says, do you create the seed or just steer it? Interesting question. I mean, I think we could say psychokinetically that you actually create the seed, that truly the correct visualization for this would be a pentagram. I mean, the physics of the reason why the pentagram was essential to magic was because, in fact, a stellated pentagram, which is basically what a dodeca is perfect implosion for wave mechanics, and therefore is the physics of magic. Magic meaning matrix of Agni, meaning the matrix of fire, which is how you make perfect flame. Incidentally, our lead teacher at the Gurdjieff Sacred Gymnastic, there at claymont.org, where I learned the sacred gymnastic in the Gurdjieff tradition, at Washington's Nephew's Pig Farm in Charlestown, West Virginia, where I learned sacred gymnastic, and had my first Kundalini experiences. But the teacher there, Pierre Elliott, very famous, I'll type his name here. He was our sacred gymnastics teacher. Did I spell his name? Pierre Elliott. Yes. He had gotten his PhD in the physics of flame from the Sorbonne. Now, isn't it interesting? There you are studying the plasma physics of what makes a flame possible. Now, how would studying that physics then enable you to design sacred dance? I suggest really to meditate on that for a moment. All of this lecture series I did on this subject were called The Perfect Flame, and we call the new wave mechanics for brainwave biofeedback called flameinmind.com. The ability to make a flame in mind, the ability to make individual or collective bliss. Why is this the same physics as Pierre Elliott emerging with his PhD from the Sorbonne with the physics of flame just before he came and taught us how to do sacred gymnastic? What is the connection? Well, you see, flame is concentric layers of plasma that stabilize around a certain sequence of molecular collapse, oxidation, which is literally oxygen seen clairvoyantly. Remember, it's a helix, so it provides a helical path for the electrons to collapse between shells called fire. Come on, baby, light my fire. Let's dance. So, when you make flame, you're learning how to stabilize a plasma field around charge collapse. Because every time the electron collapses between valence shells, it emits a photon whose wavelength is proportional to the electrical distance between those electron shells, which is the only definition of quantum mechanics, that the fact that that charge is quantized by the distance between electron shells measured in angstroms, which is actually a whole number of photons. That's the meaning, the only real meaning of quantum mechanics. So if you gather that emerging charge from that charge collapse in a dance, meiosis, mitosis? No. Well, it's close. If you gather the charge in a dance, you make a flame. You make perfectly, you stabilize the flame. The physics of flame. Now, what is a sacred dance? Remember, we're ready now to talk about category number 2 of the hygiene for bliss, which is the kinesthetic aspect. And I'll not forget Pierre Elliott standing there in the mansion in West Virginia. It was a sweaty summer there, and Pierre is explaining to us, he says, well, now, if you can put your attention into your baby finger with enough electric force, that's almost the words he used, maybe not quite. If you can put your attention in your baby finger with enough electric force, cause it to begin to generate, now he used the word feeling. He said to generate feeling in your baby finger. And I spent like years wondering what he meant by feeling. But later I realized what he meant was very simple. Your baby fingertip should start to tingle. There's my attention. I'm focusing my attention. My attention has electric power. I'm an electrical engineer. I'm engineering the electric of my attention. And there I am sticking it in my baby fingertip. Now, if I did that successfully, and just now, my baby finger is beginning to tingle. Now, he informed us that we had to be able to make that tingling feeling anytime we wanted by moving our attention any place we wanted before we could qualify to begin doing the sacred dance. Thank you, Alan. Thank you, Alan. Yes, exactly. That's what we're talking about. And so why was it a prerequisite before you could start the sacred gymnastic that you had to be able to create feeling in your finger? Well, not just your finger, but anywhere. Because remember, tornadoes are steered by the center of lowest pressure. Center of lowest pressure is called the phase conjugate centripetal fractal point. I'm going to just resuscitate my voice here 1 second. Little herbal thing here. So tornadoes are steered because there is a center of lowest pressure. The center of lowest pressure is what steers a tornado around, like a scene from Sorcerer's Apprentice from Walt Disney. And so the electric field that centered itself in your baby finger was the result of the placement there of a standing wave node. You made a wave stand. So the ability to create a field effect which has a still point is the gift, and I say the gift, of the possibility of mind. The very concept of what is mind electrically is specifically that ability to make that still point. If you cannot make a still point, you are not mindful. That still point is the implosion, which is the very essence and definition of the possibility of having a mind and being mindful. So learning to create that still point adds to the centripetal electrical inertia, which is how a flame is built, how a flame in mind is built, how psychokinesis is built, how plasma projection is built, how personal power is built, how you steer after you die, how you steer when you have a lucid dream. Thank you, Robert. Exactly. Targeted focus. Precisely. Well said. Exactly. So the wave mechanics of the possibility of focus, which is to say making a still point, is the essential problem of wave mechanics if we're to understand the nature of mind and the nature of the physics of creation. Which is why I am so adamant that physicists who are clueless, basically clueless, as to why an object falls to the ground, cannot inform you of spiritual science, because if you do not know why an object falls to the ground, you are therefore clueless about what spiritual science is. Sorry. So I think, the first thing you ask a scientist who's trying to help you understand what in life is important is, do you know why an object falls to the ground? Because objects fall to the ground because a centripetal force is created among waves in a fractal or phase conjugate condition. I was not the first one to say that fractality causes gravity. That is commonly known. I was the first one to write an equation to prove it. Planck length in time times whole number exponents golden ratio. The same still point making centripetal force, which is the reason objects fall to the ground, sorry Einstein didn't figure it out, is the physics of what allows waves to make still points in general. So I say that physicists who don't know why objects fall to the ground are basically out of their mind? No. No, I say that they're basically clueless of the origin of any centripetal force. That's why it is so connected here for our conversations. This is, again, the background science, that, and this is the link, that the conjugate cause of gravity, fractalfield.com/conjugate gravity, is kind of the underlying science substrate to then understand the companion article, fractalfield.com/conjugate perception, that phase conjugation causes gravity, which is, say, fractal implosive phase conjugation is the cause of gravity. Once you have a bit of a handle on that, and the picture's right in front of us, the reason hydrogen exists, because Planck length in time times the exponents of golden ratio, the reason hydrogen exists is because it can make a center point, a still point at the center. And that same picture of the waves that made hydrogen is the picture of your brain waves making a still point. The phase conjugate reason that perception exists. So now do we understand why the physics of flame is the same physics of creating a bliss dance? Because basically, here's the group trying to create enough electrical centripetal force to create the first bliss experience for these young people who desperately, desperately need to have a bliss experience. Remember, we're saying the skill to teach your young people how to have a bliss experience is the only biologically defensible definition of what it is to have a culture. Sorry, nations of the West, all the Europeans who think we have culture, the Americans who say we have culture, and the Japanese who say we have culture, I say nobody has culture unless they can teach their young people how to have bliss. And biologically, I say that is proven, because if you don't get bliss experience, you don't get access to the collective unconscious. You don't get access to DNA radio. You don't get access to collective memory. Can't make ancestor phone calls. Your clairaudiences work. If you don't get access to bliss experience, fundamentally you don't get a sustainable immune system. Harmonic inclusiveness defines vitality in heart rate variability literature. Well, more than that, the implosion of charge, which is bliss, is the beginning of sustainable immune system. And if you don't have a source of bliss, as we explained many times, from an electrical engineering perspective, you remain a parasite, because your ability to access charge, remember, when we get to our nutrition section, it's the charge that is the food. You bite into a whole apple, you feel a tingle in your cheek. If you bite into applesauce, you do not feel the tingle in your cheek. Well, what your nutrition professor failed to tell you in school is it is that tingle of charge that is the food. I mean, that is the nutrition. The nutrition is the charge. And that's why applesauce doesn't have as much charge as whole apple. Well, the physics is that the charge is the food. So, once you have regular access to bliss experience, you stop being a parasite because you're looking for charge outside of you. Once you can implode charge, then let's give an image for this now. Let's be poetic about this. We just walked into the cave in India where Padmasambhava put his hand and melted the stone with his hand. Okay, and you're putting your hand in the stone where Padmasambhava melted the stone with his hand. In many places, and you put your hands in that stone, melted stone of the hand print, and you're thinking, where did he get the charge to do that? And then, remember, that Padmasambhava's other name, Samuel, another name for Enki. Enki's other name, Ea, for whom Ea's earth was named, and for whom God, Dea, D''E'. So apparently Ea Enki, and his science partner, Thoth, Hermes, this is a Hermetic science symbol, caduceus, phase conjugation, all kinds of fits together, right? So then you wandered over to South France, and you climbed into the limestone cave, following the instructions of Vincent Bridges with us on our Holy Grail tours of the science of the Grail of South France. And we did. We went over to Arles, and we walked past the tree where Vincent van Gogh painted Starry Night and went insane, seeing with his clairvoyance. All just past there, and we went into this little valley where the center limestone pillar was still present, where the Romans marked the limestone cubes cut by this one central pillar, clearly depicted. It was a Da Vinci's painting Virgin in the Rocks, clearly depicted. And where you're looking out from in the painting Virgin of the Rocks, and we're walking in now, they invite us into this house, which is a cave. We walked in there, and Vincent is explaining. He says, now, it was a Da Vinci painted Virgin in the Rocks. I think that's right, yeah. And that he's just explained that after Sarah the Egyptian and the three Marys left South France. Now remember, we had just finished doing the ritual, the gypsy ritual at Marie de la Mer, and I was in the upper room in the church when they raised that casket of the Marys. They just took the Black Madonna of the Marys down to the sea, and the little casket comes up, and my hair still stands up right now, remembering the charge. It was palpable. It was like a plasma field. It was dripping with charge. So we just finished that ritual, and Vincent had explained, well, you see, after the Marys arrived in South France, that the Magdalene, or the Mary, gave birth to a son named John, meaning to branch perfectly, eons, Gian, John, and a chip off the old block, quite literally. And that son was named John Trophimus, Trophime. And the place where she gave birth, Limestone Cave, looking out the mouth of that cave, depicted in the Virgin of the Rocks, is actually the place where Trophimus was born. This is a great place for Bliss. It's a limestone cave. Perfect, very fractal field. So then Trophimus gets stuck in the messes of South France and is basically trapped in his casket in the burial ground. And he is so charged from his Kundalini, visualize the snake on Tutankhamun's brow, the Kundalini, that Trophimus lifts his knee and pushes the stone lid off of his coffin with his knee, but there was so much charge in Trophimus's aura that he melted the stone platen of his coffin lid, later called the platen of the Holy Grail. Now, where did Sam, Padmasambhava, and John Trophimus get enough charged plasma in their aura to melt his coffin lid? So much so that the major business of that town for the next 300 or so years was everyone in Europe wanted to pay to be buried there. Until in the incredible wisdom of the town elders, they decide to crisscross that sacred site with the railroad and absolutely castrate the charge of that environment. Welcome to the planet Earth. The same wisdom that put steel roof on the cathedral in northern Scotland. What's that? The famous cathedral. Roslin, yes. They put the steel roof on Roslin Chapel. The same wisdom that surrounded the Parthenon with steel ropes now. This is the idiocy of the human condition. They're making sacred space so they can make big bucks, because everybody wants to come to the sacred space, except they're clueless what sacred is. So they destroy it with the steel and aluminum, making the capacitance dead. It's a typical Borg response. So anyway, we are getting to the lesson about how you get that much charge in your aura. Remember, once you wake up from the nightmare that is history, it's only the physics lesson that remains. And the physics lesson is what tonight is about. So getting that much charge in your aura is the hygiene for bliss. So we're understanding that the critical inertia math of the fixing of your attention begins the process of building an aura, and then every thought, every word, everything you eat, everything is about attracting charge. And so this is what Christians call the quality of grace, chi, orgone, baraka, shaktipat. It's actually biologic capacitance, and capacitive coupling is actually the electrical engineering of this science. For example, if you measure how efficiently two capacitors are coupled, and then you walk over, say, a ley line or deep primary underground water, you find that the coefficient of efficiency of capacitive coupling has measurably changed slightly. I'm introducing you now to the clue of a technology that can be used to measure the presence of primary water or sacred space or ley lines, is efficiency of capacitive coupling. Or when the HeartMath Institute and the Princeton Noosphere measure collective human emotion with what they call Joseph's junction, the reason when 1 million people have the same thought at the same moment as they did at 9/11, that the random number generator at Princeton Noosphere project changes, the physics, which they appear to be clueless of, is in fact capacitive coupling. The Joseph's junction is basically a sensitive capacitor. And the reason that capacitive coupling, the efficiency of these charge resonators, capacitors, ability to talk to each other at a distance, changes when you're in sacred space, is because the phase conjugate array geometry allows that embeddability literally parallel to the onset of superconductivity. So the Ark of the Covenant worked better when you put it on a ley line for controlling radioactive fields, for example, because it could be more centripetal. And And the Cozy Rev mirrors work better when you put them on the energy line crosses. So you need to know where the energy line crosses are in order to build a labyrinth, start a sacred space, build a cathedral, install a Cozy Rev mirror, do your Bliss process. That's why the magnetic map is so critical, because the environment begins to create a centripetal field. Let's see, Hayam is saying no sound. Are you rest of you hearing me okay? Sometimes this is localized. Yeah, okay, so Robert still has sound. Yeah, so Alan's got sound. Hayam, it might be a local web condition there. Hopefully, maybe if all else fails, try a restart. So we now have related some of the hygiene for bliss. We talked about the kinesthetic. Recognize when Sister Mary Nunn says, move with the quality of grace and don't be a jerk, what she means is that if you move in a golden spiral at the correct change of velocity over time, that when you come to the still point, you feel a tingle. And that tingle is related to what's called a calculus of curvature, which is the charge acquisition physics, which is the only definition of the quality of grace. So graceful movement is identical with the quality of movement that continuously allows you to bring your capacitive field with you. Whereas if you make a jerky motion, unfortunately, what happens is you leave part of your aura behind. So there's this multi-billion-dollar industry for teaching young people how to move gracefully, but they don't even understand the physics. The physics is that the ability to create the centripetal connection between your molecular geometry, your nervous wiring in your blood, and a capacitive field that travels with you, it is a quality of grace. It's like the Tai Chi master that can push you over without appearing to move, because they've learned to move their charged plasma field separate from their body. And that's the inner discipline of moving an electric field with your attention. That's the beginning of all of this science, is how do you move an electric field with your attention. And this is a matter of developing inner muscles. And the skill to build these inner muscles is what sacred gymnastic, the Gurdjieff gymnastic, or the eurythmy of Steiner, or the tensegrity of Castaneda, they introduce this idea of building these inner muscles. Another aspect is in the Gurdjieff gymnastic, for example. I've used this example many times, but we learned to do this dance called forming twos. So I'm moving my right hand at frequency X, and I'm moving my left hand at frequency X over 2. Now, if I've got it together, I can move my head at exactly frequency X over 4. Now, if I've got it really together, I can move my leg at frequency X over 8. You get the idea that the number of octaves that you could hold together in your attention is the number of wavelengths you can bring to converge in your attention. And so you do these, this was called forming twos in the sacred gymnastic. So you're building the inner muscle to hold more frequencies together in your kinesthetic awareness at once, which is literally your ability to implode these frequencies. Now, obviously, if also then the motion of that dance creates this fractal rose-like pattern, etc., eventually you're going to begin to implode the charge field of your environment. And it's said that, as we mentioned, that at the climax of the film Meetings with Remarkable Men, where they actually displayed the sacred gymnastics of Gurdjieff, and I was the piano player for the Gurdjieff gymnastic there in West Virginia for a while, that the actual electric energy of the Bliss dance penetrated the very celluloid of the film. Now, this this is a palpable electric field. You can see it grow. People are moving perfectly in synchrony, and their capacitance is imploding. So it is said that the ability to form a soul group and form a group that lucid dreams together, form a group that learns to do the sacred gymnastic together, a group that learns to do the therapy together, that you choose these people as you would choose your lovers. Because once once the photon beam has converged to once in the Bell's theorem, and the photons merge in the opposite directions, they're always connected. So, once two photons have truly merged, they can never really get out of bed. So choose your lovers, choose your bliss partners carefully. So there's a certain hygiene to this, but it's also true that it's necessary to have soul group, so the group collective plasma field can learn to travel the stars together, lucid dream together, and eventually go through the heart of the sun together. So this is all introduction to the science and hygiene of bliss. Now, while we're having this conversation about the Gurdjieff school, I suppose I suggested that I would say a little bit about my story here in terms of my story of Kundalini. Because that's how it happened for me, that I had been doing the sacred gymnastic at the Gurdjieff school, and I started having these fiery charge up the tailbone kind of experiences, Kundalini experiences in West Virginia. And I probably might have been diagnosed, as having some kind of, problems with intense Kundalini symptoms, except that I was kind of adopted by Lisa Nella and later Bentoff, who wrote the book on Kundalini. And with my background in psychophysiology, instead of being insane, I decided to understand it. And hence the biophysics of Kundalini was something very personal to me. So the question for tonight's conversation is, what triggers the Kundalini? Now, and again, we all don't claim to be experts on this. For example, I'm very critical of Wilhelm Reich for writing the book Function of the Orgasm, where he sees that if you can't dissipate the creative juices of the cell, pathology can result. But unfortunately, he sees then the function of the orgasm as a kind of dissipative function, and it appeared to me, and I didn't review the literature carefully, but my impression of Wilhelm Reich's book, The Function of the Orgasm, was actually he was functionally clueless about how the orgasmic blue fire ultraviolet energy of orgasm was actually a raw material for Kundalini, Tantra, and human bliss. And in fact, I didn't perceive that Wilhelm Reich appeared to even know what bliss, Tantra, or Kundalini were. And so I take umbrage with that ignorance and suggest a more complete physics, which is part of what we might chat here about. Let's see. Are simply exercises to teach kids and old people. Yes, there are more movement resources. Actually, the Gurdjieff gymnastic I think are excellent, but the Sufi dance, sacred circle dance, the Findhorn dance, all of these things are wonderful, gentle introduction to these things, which I highly recommend. I think Sufi dance, sacred circle dance kinds of things is very appropriate for schools where you wouldn't have to have young boys destroying their bones and getting brain concussions with football if they knew touch permissive behaviors. Touch permissive behavior, and I don't mean even physical touch, I mean where your plasma can touch, which is obviously the sacred gymnastic or the dance, that bliss dance is totally appropriate for schools. And it shouldn't be called bliss dance, it could be called sacred circle dance. But remember, urge to touch frustrated becomes anger by definition. This is how Carl Jung defined the origin of the Balinese cockfight, which is basically the electric science of football. Football exists because if you have an urge to touch and it is frustrated, that becomes anger. And that anger is quite literally a poison pellet, in this case a turd, otherwise known as a football, which then you need to push out. and this is I'm a paid advertising representative for the National Football League here. That brain concussions and broken bones from football would not be necessary if young people had touch permissive behavior. Example: sacred circle dance, Sufi dance, any form of collective yoga, something that allowed their auras collectively to fuse and merge and experience the beginnings of bliss process, which is physically the opposite of football. The obscene football salaries, don't get me started on that. Let's see, can you comment on the term idea of how DNA creates light morphic field? Yes, well, DNA is fitting into this specifically because the implosive geometry of the hydrogen bond, which is my equation, which is right in front of us here in this picture, is the center of every ladder rung codon of DNA, the hydrogen bond, the zipper of the soul. And then you braid the braid of the braid on the braid of the dodecahedral ratchet that is DNA, and that makes an implosive zipper cocoon. The thread to string to rope to fat rope, braid on the braid of DNA is measurably phase-locked, imploded, phase cohered by the phonon wave geometry of human bliss. That article starts at goldenmean.info/DNA manifesto. Spell that right. And then the study that was done on the effect of human bliss on phonon geometry, proving that it affects the braid of DNA, is the study by Glenn Ryan there, which is there with the low frequency phonon harmonics of EKG coherence, which, as I predicted, then Glenn Ryan measured, that the DNA braid density, the amount of enzyme associated with the zipper of the mechanism of braiding in DNA, responds and correlates measurably to the onset of heart coherence. So basically, get this beautiful music, low frequency content in your heart and brain, and your DNA helix goes through. Responds by recursively braiding. And that implosion then makes the phase conjugation of the hydrogen bond much more long wave context dependence. And context dependence in DNA as the poetry of disciplined embedding of the short wave and long wave is the famous book by Jeremy Campbell called Grammatical Man, Entropy, Language, and Life. That's a beautiful book. And what it's saying is that you could find, if one letter was missing from a word, or one word was missing from a sentence, or one sentence was missing from you could find by context richness and replace the missing. That's called braid density or perfect embedding. And if you apply the concept of perfect embedding, as in DNA, short wave to long wave, all golden ratio based perfect embedding, to wave mechanics, you get phase conjugate centripetal force. So basically, DNA was designed to bend the light. Or the Sufi saying, only love bends light, therefore only love creates. What they meant when they said that was that long wave phi ratio embedding creates the implosive force that can cause a charge that was going in a line, which in physics is called energy, to create a centripetal force which can bend the light, and then the line goes into a circle. And when charge in a line called energy suddenly starts going in a circle, that's called mass. So charge in a circle stores inertia, and that's called mass. So when they say only love bends the light and only love creates, it means only perfect embedding, recursive, non-destructive embedding, fractal fields, bend the light, or suck the line into the circle. That's the physics of creation. It's quite real. Also, the companion Sufi saying was, "From length is longing born," which is to say, if you experience the agony of separation, it creates for the possibility of yearning, which enables oneness. So in other words, you needed to feel the agony of feeling lonely, quite literally. They say that separateness is functionally an illusion in wave mechanics, but more precisely, the separation of charge, the isolation of charge, which is made possible by non-conjugate systems, creates, or non-fractal, creates a situation where charge that fail to commune is literally experiencing separateness. And so once you experience separateness, then that creates the yearning. Gurdjieff said, charge the battery of yearning, and the Buddha said, eliminate desire. Who was right? Well, what Gurdjieff meant was that the yearning for oneness then creates the possibility that your aura can then re-experience fusion. And plasma fusion, we can discuss the mathematics of plasma fusion when we discuss among electrical engineers, for example, how the Therify is built. That's plasma fusion. Phase conjugate, plasma, the pine cones kissing noses. This is plasma fusion. But the psychology of that is you preparing to die, is you preparing for bliss, is you preparing for fusion. It's Thomas Geckler saying, I don't mind not needing to have secrets. Isn't that what you were saying, Thomas? You see, somewhere early on, I decided I was going to do an experiment in sharing in my life where secrets are a pain in the ass. Who really wants to have secrets? Why should secrets? I mean, supposing I was the U.S. government and I was saying, I want to do an experiment where secrets aren't necessary. George Bush might have a little problem with that one. But actually, for the successful death, you know what you need to do? Find the place in yourself that doesn't need a secret. You see, the illusion of needing to have a secret is precisely what cannot do plasma fusion. The illusion of needing to have a secret is exactly what cannot make it through death. Exactly. So preparing for death, preparing for bliss, preparing for tantra, preparing for fusion, preparing for plasma projection, preparing for magic, all of those things is identical with eliminating the need for secrets. This is another public relations announcement for the NSA. We think that secrets are unnecessary. Sorry, you got it wrong. Well, from a biologic perspective, actually, secrets are the problem. They're not the solution. They're the problem. Because a secret is a wave which is not shareable. And shareability is precisely what phase conjugate plasma fusion, fractality, implosion is. So, I think I'll get off my political stump here, stop running for president, and answer some questions. Robert Rivard says, Dan, speaking of agony, the secret life of plants. It's funny that The Secret Life of Plants was written by two very good friends of mine, Chris Bird and Cleve Baxter. And I was with, Marcel Vogel, when we first developed the transducers. You see, what's happening is, I have to tell a story. So there I was in graduate school in the psychophysiology lab, and I had just learned to build the Wheatstone bridge, which measures galvanic skin response, GSR. You put these two conductive paste-filled electrode cups on two fingers, usually these two fingers for some reason, and you and you measure slight changes in resistance with what's called a Wheatstone bridge. And then you put the college student connected to the transducers in front of Playboy magazine, and you put the naked girl in front of them, and you watch this dramatic effect on the GSR. It goes off the charts, right? So what did the emotional response to sexual stimuli have to do with finger resistance? Remember, this is the same transducer which Marcel Vogel and then Chris Bird and then Cleve Baxter placed on the leaf of the plant to prove that the plant was telepathic. It was a slight change in resistance. And when you relax, your resistance goes toward the superconductive. Resistance goes down. So resistance is futile. It is a privilege to be assimilated. No. What they meant by resistance is futile is that the superconductive or phase conjugate state is precisely the elimination of resistance. And the elimination of resistance is precisely what the collective mechanism of biologic radio accomplishes. So that's the principle at work, is that the plant is participating in a collective mitogenic DNA radio field. And reduced resistance, which is reduced stress, increased relaxation in the same way that it responds to telepathy with humans. And I saw Marcel Vogel, I was there in Toronto with him, and he was taking his crystal and he was zapping this plant, and you could watch the polygraph going up and down on the plant. The plant leaf was clearly telepathic with Marcel Vogel's crystal. So the physics was actually the resistance reduction resulting from capacitive coupling. That's a way of talking about it. Hayem says, how to introduce the idea of shareable thoughts to the business world. How to reduce the inequalities in global wealth. We did start a website called fractaleconomics.net, I believe. Let me make sure I got that right. fractaleconomics.net. And basically, what we tried to show was that, yeah, it's fractaleconomics.net, that basically money is merely a symbol for human energy, not of itself good or evil. And yet, the distribution of energy that optimizes perfected distribution, which is named abundance in economics theory. So, perfect distribution is functionally identical with abundance. No one argues. Perfect distribution in electric field theory is literally the fractal field. So we could say, one moment. Yes, we could say that achieving perfect charge distribution is identical in geometry with achieving perfect energy distribution. We now know exactly what perfect energy distribution is. It looks like a rose. Make a magnetic map of your bed and your house and your village, rearrange things to look like a rose, and you got it. The possibility of bliss, possibility of collective unconscious. Well, the same applies to economic theory, that achieving perfect resource distribution, which is identical with saying perfected distribution equals eliminating storage. So in economic theory, now there's a kind of ideal aspect of this. Oh, if we could eliminate storage, we would in fact have abundance by definition. Look, if we could eliminate the need to store food by perfecting the distribution of food, everyone on the planet would definitely have more than enough to eat. It's really very simple. Well, how do you eliminate the need for storage? Obviously, perfect distribution. The distribution that perfects that obviously looks like a rose or fractal, hence the concept of fractaleconomic.net. Now, there's a parallel to this in my partner Valerie here, the Ananda Marga School, has what they call PROUT, progressive utilization theory. Very parallel to this, that basically all resources should be based on perfect sharing. Now, this is parallel to the concept of socialism, which we know has problems, because in socialism, if we look at, I believe it's Venezuela, which is dying today, socialism doesn't appear to work because motivation doesn't work. But if you take the ideas of socialism and you combine it with the education associated with understanding how shareability creates abundance, then you can restore the motivation, which is the problem with socialism, which is basically people aren't motivated because da-da-da. So in the presence of education, the perfect form of what used to be socialism, which really is perfect sharing, which is fractal economics, is made possible. So once everyone understands how perfect sharing of resources is enabled, then instead of having to motivate everyone using capitalism, everyone's motivated by the science of bliss, actually. So it does go back to the same problem we started the tonight's class with, is that if you do not understand what people are for, you do not understand that they don't get bliss, they don't get immortal. So the word politics which is defined by body polis, and the body polis is literally the plasma body created by Bliss. You know, the beehive can't swarm until there's a body polis. A political body is therefore a bliss cocoon. Therefore, if you can't have collective bliss process and you don't know what bliss's people are for, well, then you do not have any politics by definition, by biologic definition. So this means once people understand the biologic imperative that is bliss, the title of tonight's course, then you can create a politics in which a form of socialism, which is not socialism at all, it's literally fractal economics, where there is a rigor to the discipline to enable perfected distribution, perfected sharing of resource sharing defined by the ability of that resource to create human bliss, literally and simply a big aura. So, you know, if Bill Gates were deciding who should have vaccines based on who gets a big aura, it might change his mind, it might change his opinion. If George Bush could define who goes under the Secrecy Acts based on who gets a big aura, you know, if we decided what the rules are for a successful school based on making big auras, do you think that would change our body polis? I mean, our politic? Do you see why this all resolves to the education around the science of bliss? Okay, suggestion here. Hayam says, share your ideas about a healthy diet and food production for future people in the future. Should we move out for the city, for example, and somewhere to the Russian Far East and set up our own? Or should we become professional spoon whittlers? No. Or maybe we should start studying 3D printing. Well, actually, I believe the U.S. government made a profound mistake when they legislated to eliminate the possibility of the existence of family farms. You know, there was an express movement in America to eliminate family farms, when in fact the family farms was the actual bliss cocoon which made the U.S. powerful enough to win World War II. The reason the U.S. won World War II was the family farms, which then the U.S. made the family farm illegal, basically. And that was a tragedy because, in fact, the family farm was also a bliss cocoon, which is what made the auras of those boys powerful. So yes, food production needs to, it's kind of the sense of the family farm. I mean, it's independent community agriculture. It's the Findhorn-like concept. And that's the other key part of this is the tragedy of the United States. One of the biggest parts of the tragedy that is the United States is the death of the elemental forces. If you travel around the Great Plains, or if you drive across California toward Mount Shasta, I'll never forget almost weeping from the tragedy of the fact that you could see that all the elemental forces are basically dead. This is why tornadoes will destroy such a country, because if the elemental forces are dead, then the large storms and things have nothing to steer them. So basically, countries like the United States, which have murdered their elemental forces, deserve destructive tornadoes and destructive weather. They actually deserve it, because that's called biofeedback. We must bring back the elemental forces. So until they can teach children how to play with the elementals, and then the farmer how to create the place for the elemental forces in the field, there is no hope for that country, actually. Now, very practically, the way the farmer invites elementals, you make a magnetic map of the farm, and elementals require genetic diversity, and they require areas in the farm where a wild space is maintained. It's literally the ground base for the elemental forces. So you have areas where the wild space is maintained, and then you have extreme genetic diversity, and then you have ley lines that are fed and nourished by the rock geometry, and eventually you're inviting back the elementals. It's sort of the physics of Findhorn here. And without it, nations are doomed, literally doomed. The elemental forces regard humans as drunk and stupid for not working with them, because only if we work with the elemental forces, which is called plasma physics, by the way, do we have the possibility of actually communing with nature and creating the synchrony where As in Camelot, there's a legal limit to the snow here. I mean, Arthur and the land are one. Whom does the Grail serve? Itself. No, it's just about the fact that understanding the physics of elemental forces is basically the same as understanding how plasma domains become self-steering. You know, sylphs and undines, these are plasma worms. They have a life. They have needs. They have synergy. They have ability to serve us, and we have ability to serve them. This is the large-scale forces which steer lightnings and tornadoes, the gnomes, the elementals. All of the geobiology schools teach the young people how to work with the elemental forces. And until this returns to the United States, that country is functionally doomed, I would say. And, you know, there's the Findhorn, there's many examples of this. But young people in schools who compare their drawings of elemental forces realize that these are real, and realize how to talk to them, how to work with them, and how to play with them. So this is one example of food production that requires an understanding of plasma fields, which is what elemental forces are. Yes, must support the little farmer to share their bliss. So I was going to say a little bit more about Kundalini triggers here. Another example of a Kundalini trigger is what's called the pelvic tilt. I don't know if you can see it here, but if you basically lean forward on your pelvis, the tailbone is a straw, and the straw that is the tailbone needs to learn how to suck. And the wave mechanics of Kundalini is that the low frequencies of the coherent heart and brain create a sacrocranial pump. We talked about that in several of these courses. And so the spine liquid pump then is a straw that can suck from the blue dish at the tail, at the spine base. And the blue dish at the spine base is where your creative juices are focused in foreplay or sex, but not just sex, but also, you know, your creative power resides there. Then that ultraviolet component of the creative collected, remember, the cell metabolism climaxes in the creation of high quality ultraviolet light, the blue fire. And that is then, you know, if your attention and your movement allows that spine liquid to be pumped, I'm pumping my spine liquid, then the tailbone unfurls and opens like a straw. You know, double Scorpios love to talk about this sort of thing. We don't apologize for sting. We enjoy it. This is your stinger. And the tailbone then can suck. Literally, there's vestigial horsehairs, which are ultraviolet waveguides, and the ultraviolet component, the blue fire sex juice, can go up the spine and literally be measured in the microwave. It's ADP, which we now know is a phase conjugator thanks to my new equation for adenosine diphosphate. It's implosive charge collapse. So all of that creative juice then gets pumped to the brain crown, and there's an explosion of growth and creative juice here, and at the top of your head lights a flame, and it's visible from a distance, called the Great Mass of God, as the physics of Kundalini was called in Iceland, in Bentoff's book with Lee Sinella on the biophysics of Kundalini, Stalking the Wild Pendulum. So the economy of the body's processing of the blue fire sex juice is related directly to the ability to build that flame starting from below and moving upward. And this is precisely what Wilhelm Reich did not appear to know about when he wrote his book, The Function of the Orgasm, sadly. Best to experience while seated. Well, basically, you know, there's all these therapies that are designed to restore the spine liquid pumping. And we know the Therify can bring the spine liquid pump to a still point. And we know when the spine liquid pump goes to a still point, called the healing crisis, what that is the phase conjugate builds to a still point. And when the spine liquid pump emerges from the still point to restore the tidal harmonics, they then restore pumping with more phase discipline. That's why, as Upledger says, if your spine liquid is pumping, it is clinically impossible to be depressed. Now, later in the more advanced stuff, which is part of what tonight's about, we see that this is part of the Tutankhamun story, where Tutankhamun, remember, he is depicted with this serpent from the crown right here in the statuary, and we realize that that is a symbol for Kundalini in the life of Tutankhamun. I have a fragment of the Tutankhamun soul memory here. It's not exactly reading, but I have pieces of that memory. I woke up after my Kundalini remembering how Tutankhamun was used by the priests around the pharaoh for rainmaking. When I first had Kundalini, I realized that I could make rain. You know, I had studied Rolling Thunder and realized why he would pickle the underbelly of the right black beetle related to the Egyptian scarab, and the underbelly of that particular black beetle was profoundly fractal, and that's how Rolling Thunder made rain. Well, I learned how to pick up a pine cone and do something similar. Well, so I realized that, you know, there was a natural response to storms from Kundalini, and I started playing with that, exploring that, and Valerie was with me in Australia when I think we were pretty helpful in ending a drought once in Australia. And, you know, so I understood a little bit of the rainmaking. And then I realized, I meditated on why Tutankhamun was such a rainmaker. And I realized that, you know, if you're a pharaoh and you can't deliver the rain, you get fired. It's simple as it's the most well-known physics of what it is to be a pharaoh. Is if you can't produce the rain, actually the flooding of the Nile at the right time of year, you ain't pharaoh anymore. You get fired. This is pharaoh qualifications for the job of pharaoh 101 is you make sure that that Nile floods at the right time, or you get fired. So 100 generations of pharaohs passing on the yearning, you know, your life is the direction in the wind of the yearning of your ancestors at the moment of their death. So if you go back to your most emotionally present ancestors and study the yearning of the moment of their death or your birth, either one, and you discover the wind in your sails. Well, the yearning of those ancestors for 100 generations of Pharaoh was, you damn well better be a rainmaker. You ain't going to keep your job very long. So there is Tutankhamun, and the pharaohs are using his Kundalini as a rainmaker. I figured out why when I was a kid. I couldn't stand it when Superman put that little ring on his finger on television. The reason I couldn't stand it was because I recognized how that ring, which is the Toy Stone fire crystal, was misused in Atlantis, which is how the Thutmosis line of the pharaohs got started. Well, that's another story. But the physics of rainmaking, then when I saw Vincent Bridges doing these Ophanim rituals, and we regularly created storms the size of continents. Which is why I enjoyed so many times telling the story about John Dee informing Queen Elizabeth a year in advance about the storm that was going to take out the Spanish Armada, later named the Tempest when Shakespeare wrote the play, after Shakespeare, under the name Francis Garland in John Dee's notebooks, learned from Kelly and Dee in Prague, the Ophanim Enochian, and he planned the 7 Hills of Prague ritual. A lot of that's at goldenmean.info/Bohemia. Bohemia, we had those stories. And but basically, it's just that the ability to use the elemental forces to control large weather systems, the story of the Tempest and Kelly and Dee and Shakespeare, is instructive to the science of steering things like the solar wind, actually. And that might be someplace we could go with this, just to say, I strongly emphasize and suggest that all the ETs have informed us that the reason the real estate on Earth was questionable in value was because the sun was functionally not stable enough for long-term. And one of the ways in which the sun is not stable is these things called Carrington event, which is these big tornadoes of plasma that come from the sun. Now, the gene pool on Earth might have a chance if we learned how to steer tornadoes, and I mean solar tornadoes. So you get these groups of people who are doing these bliss rituals, Therify rituals, and you begin to teach them how to do tornado steering, and eventually they learn how to steer the solar wind. You get what I'm talking about? And I say that the sun is not saying, the sun is not saying, I need to toast the DNA of Earth. No, the sun is not saying that. The sun is saying, unless the DNA of Earth learns how to steer the solar wind, the DNA of Earth cannot be saved. It's similar to being not worth saving, but what it means is that until we collectively learn how to steer the wind, it means we haven't grown up. So there's an appropriate natural selection for the Earth saying, oh, the sun is saying, I am going to go have my orgasm, the solar wind, the solar maxima, the rapture. And during the rapture, the guns will melt. What they meant was, if the field is not phase conjugate, it will create heat. Remember, we said that the Brown's gas, hydrogen implosive cold flame, will melt the steel, but it won't burn your hand. The same physics is why the phase conjugate field of the solar maxima will melt the guns, but it won't melt people who have compressibility. So there is a little bit of physics behind the religious fundamentalists who are unfortunately voting for Donald Trump. Oh, I'm aghast. But the religious fundamentalists say, you do not want to be the left behind. And what they mean by do not be the left behind is they say, when the rapture comes, the rapture is a compression wave. Hint, how do you survive compression? Hint, this is the only subject of tonight's course. Prepare yourself to sustain bliss, which is identical with surviving the center of a lightning bolt. And Daniel Brinkley can inform you how he did that. It's a scene from the movie Powder. Surviving a lightning bolt is what Kundalini is about, and which is to say, to be in the center of a plasma flame. If you think an unshareable thought, you will immediately generate heat. However, if you learn to focus on pure principle, which is to say, be a totally shareable wave, and not need secrets, as Thomas Geckler said, then, so seriously, I recommend that these bliss meditations around the planet that we practice as a group, learning to steer tornadoes, massive storm systems, massive earth tectonic events, etc., that we practice creating plasma domains which are centripetal enough collectively to steer these events, and eventually, and we know a group in Western Canada that was steering tornadoes all the time. Eventually, we will learn how to steer the solar wind. And then we might grow up. Then the sun might know that we could be, as a race, savable. This is the physics of what religious people call salvation, truly. Jimmy says, I have and feel a subtle vibration feelings and waves of energy up and down my body. Is this just chi? Yes, no, actually, Jimmy, so you're feeling this charge. You can feel this rush sometimes. That's good. And so in your best moment, Jimmy, when your nutrition is perfect and your environment is perfect and you've got the stillness and things are kind of just right, sometime after you feel that wave of bliss and charge, then move very slowly and then slower and cascade to a still point, and then just sit very slow and still, and then try doing a caduceus fire breath. You know what that is? You breathe in and out, huge breath, and then 0.618, and then 0.618, a smaller and smaller refined breath, until you come to a still point in your breathing. And then at that still point, you stay in that stillness, and you visualize an open corridor coming up your spine toward your head, and a converse mirror conjugate image from the crown of your head back down to your tailbone. And as you feel that and visualize that, you'll feel a bolt of lightning begin to grow, and it's a force that feels like a red-hot torch coming up your spine, and in your head, the crown of your head feels like a red-hot coal you can't push out. But only stay in that stillness as long as your intuition tells you 2, and don't stay too long, because you want to do your Kundalini gradually, because if it releases all at once, it really is and can be quite dangerous. And you know, all those people who wrote books on Kundalini, Gopi Krishna and Krishnamurti, they were basically crybabies. They were clueless as to the biophysics. And they said, oh, we're in pain. Please, dear God, take my Kundalini away from me. Instead of understanding how to gradually condition themselves to gradually being able to withstand more and more charge. Alan says, one time, even 100 years ago in the Western mystery, you were not considered an adept unless you could make weather. The fact that so many public adepts no longer can do this is a sign that the spiritual health of the Western mystery tradition is prepared for the spiritual health of the youth. Exactly. That's what we're saying, is that it should not be regarded as esoteric woo-woo to be able to control the weather plasma. It should not be considered esoteric woo-woo that one good shaman is worth more than George Bush's whole military budget. No, the fact is that this is a natural outgrowth of human evolution, and we must understand the plasma coherence of evolution in your aura as perfectly natural, perfectly scientific, and perfectly appropriate. In fact, the only way to get immortal and go through the heart of the sun. So let's grow up and stop considering this woo and begin to understand the engineering, and that will make the spiritual science even richer. Matt says, I've experienced and created lightning from no clouds that struck the dirt. I felt like I was in deep water and ecstasy. Excellent, Matt. That was very good. And so we can begin, Matt, when you start to have experiences like that, where you kind of call the lightning, etc., to begin to imagine what it is to do that in an environment of service, where, remember that fundamentally the wave from the mountain comes to you when that wave of charge realizes that by jumping into your aura, it becomes immortal and shareable. So it's like the dowser steering the water vein into a well. If you're doing that to produce a nasty factory to make bombs, well, eventually that water is going to realize that the water should not have listened to you jumping into the well when you steered the plasma. However, if you were a dowser and you steered the water vein into a well to make kids have bliss, that water is going to be grateful to you, the dowser. So the next time you come and ask the water vein to move by embedding in its aura, the water is going to trust you. Well, this is the same with shaman moving the plasma of mountains. Pure intention has an electrical meaning. If there's long-term pure intention, then you can really ride the long wave, Uncle Joe. So it is about actually evolving the real deep feeling of what a shareable wave is. Remember, DNA is a wave collectivizing device. DNA is a way of collecting shareable memory for 1 billion years. So when you jump into that electric field of the collective unconscious, you're literally jumping into a collective survival memory that always knows when you have thought something shareable, which is to say, distill pure principle from every situation. Let's see, no damage, however, saw purple for a few moments. Yes, surviving lightning. That's why I think Daniel Brinkley's books about his two near-death experiences in lightning are instructive. You know, everybody he touched after his near-death experience, he would have a flash to see their key emotions of their life, because literally his DNA was a superconductor. We know that you subject DNA to a little bit of lightning at the moment of crystallization, it's measurably a superconductor. So this is the nature of bliss experience, and eventually enables your plasma becomes massively centripetal. Matt says, it humbled me and put me into the path I'm now under with water and minerals around the world. Thank you, Dan. My heart opening was intense. Oh, thank you, Matt. That's beautiful. That's beautiful. It's great that we really understand what heart opening means, which is perfect embedding, which is actually here. This is the symbol for the Valentine here. And look what a symbol for a Valentine is. You know, it is the Holy Grail. This is perfect embedding. It's the perfect Valentine. I'm sending you a Valentine over here. Oh, by the way, it's a physics equation. Joyce says, I'm feeling healed. Thank you. Thank you. Well, thank you, Joyce. That's great. Ellen says they're leaving. Oh, that's great. Okay. Well, we're glad that Alan and Teresa were with us. If people want to know more about their work with Theophanem and Nochian work, they work with the Journal of the Western Mystery Tradition, and there are some links to that from our article about the work with Theophanem, goldenmean.info/Theophanem. But basically, yes, we need to call first the elemental forces on the size of the farm, but eventually we need to be able to work with elemental forces the size of stars. And that's why, unfortunately, Michael Sarian thought that John Dee was evil because he's playing with what he called the macrobes, but didn't realize that humans are intended to be calling and working with plasma domains the size of stars, which is really what angels are. It's the real physics behind the plasmauniverse.com. The plasma universe scientists absolutely recognize that the physics of what they're working with deals exactly what spiritual tradition called angelic beings. And this is why plasma science merges so beautifully with spiritual wisdom. Oh, yes. Jimmy says, friend me on Facebook. Okay, Jimmy, I'll try to friend you on Facebook. You know, Facebook limits your number of friends to 5,000, and I'm very, very close. But, you know, I will do that. But also, anybody can just do follower. If you click follower on facebook.com/fractalfield is our blog. Okay, I'll look for you there. Blessings. Well, great. Any other questions or comments tonight? We didn't exactly finish our course. We didn't get onto our nutrition very much. On the nutrition science, remember we said that genetic diversity, majority of your diet is raw food, the correct essential oils. I mean, most of you know that kind of stuff, but really life force in the food is the essential thing. And of course, prepared food and monocultured grains, etc., are really fatal to the Bliss diet. Basically, monoculture food like white flour and most corn and soy today, unfortunately, they make mucus because your body is simply saying not self to a DNA that's in pain. So we do need to ask everything we eat, when was the last time you experienced genetic diversity? Because that's what an heirloom garden is. That's what happy DNA is. DNA that's been exposed to monoculture is quite literally in pain, and it's very natural that it would create mucus, truly. Wayne says, off to do a tap of Ormus and join the Therify field. Great, Wayne. Thank you. And Matt says, would love to open a Therify technology here. Yes, we're trying to make the Therify technology more shareable, and there's lots of ways to do that. We're working at it. But in the meantime, you can visit centers. Wayne is getting a Therify there. There'll be one in New York, one in Georgia. Wayne will have it in Oklahoma and also maybe Chicago sometime. And we have one going in Calgary, and there will be more. We, of course, Sydney and London and Paris, Perpignan, Prague, and Bosnia coming up for Therify. So, thank you, everybody. Blessings. Oh, yes, well, Jimmy, we'll try to get to Alaska. Let's see what we can do. Let's stay in touch on that. Okay, it's been a fun evening. Thanks for joining us, everybody. Remember, the science of bliss comes from the heart. And thanks for sharing that, everybody. Sweet dreams. And thank you to Thomas and all the friends in Georgia. And it's been wonderful. See you. Bye. Night.